Welcome to Dream Tale Sleep Stories. Tonight's reading is Miyamoto Musashi. Settle into your bed or sofa and let your shoulders, jaw, and eyelids grow heavy. Inhale slowly, 1, 2, 3, and sigh the air away, allowing the day to fade into quiet dark. With every soft inhale, you invite fresh English phrases. With every gentle exhale, stray thoughts drift farther off. Behind my voice flows a gentle 528 Hz melody, renowned for guiding the mind toward deep relaxation. Keep your eyes closed, or follow the captions, whichever feels right. Simply receive the rhythm and resonance of the language. Deep in rest, tonight's phrases will take root like seeds, ready to bloom into stronger English skills with the morning light. When you feel settled, hold that unhurried breath and allow yourself to drift into the tale. Miyamoto Musashi begins now, and when the story's final line has faded, the music will linger a little longer, carrying you gently deeper into sleep. Miyamoto Musashi. In the mountains of Harima Province, in the year 1584, a child was born who would become Japan's greatest swordsman. His name was Shinmen Takezo, though the world would remember him as Miyamoto Musashi. The infant's cries echoed through the wooden halls of his father's house, as if announcing the arrival of someone destined for greatness. Takezo's father, Shinmen Munisai, was already a respected warrior and master of various martial arts. From the earliest age, young Takezo watched his father practice with wooden swords in their garden, his movements flowing like water, yet striking with the force of thunder. The boy's dark eyes followed every gesture, absorbing the rhythm and discipline of the martial way. A warrior must understand more than just the sword, Munisai often told his son. He must know the way of strategy, the art of timing, and above all, he must know himself. These words would echo in Takezo's mind throughout his life, though at the time, he was more interested in holding a wooden practice sword than understanding philosophy. By the age of 7, Takezo was already showing remarkable talent with weapons. His father began teaching him the fundamentals of swordsmanship, but the boy possessed an intensity that sometimes worried the older man. Unlike other children who played with wooden swords as toys, Takezo treated every practice session as if his life depended on it. When Takezo was 10 years old, his father died suddenly, leaving the boy orphaned and angry at the world. His uncle took him in, but Takezo had become wild and uncontrollable. He would disappear into the mountains for days at a time, practicing sword techniques he had learned from his father, developing his own unique style through trial and error. The young man's reputation for violence grew as he entered his teenage years. He challenged older, more experienced fighters and defeated them with a combination of natural talent and ruthless determination. By the age of 16, he had already killed his first opponent in a formal duel, a moment that changed him forever. Standing over his fallen enemy, Takezo felt no joy in his victory, only a hollow emptiness. He had proven he could take a life, but the act brought him no satisfaction. This was the beginning of his long journey toward understanding what it truly meant to be a warrior. In 1600, when Takezo was 17 years old, he joined the army of the Ashikaga clan and fought in the Great Battle of Sekigahara. This massive conflict would determine the future of Japan, pitting the forces of Tokugawa Ieyasu against those loyal to Toyotomi Hideyoshi's heir. The young warrior threw himself into combat with fierce abandon, cutting down enemy soldiers with deadly efficiency. However, the Ashikaga forces were defeated, and Takezo found himself on the losing side of history. As he fled the battlefield with his friend Matahachi, he began to question everything he had believed about honor, loyalty, and the way of the warrior. The defeat at Sekigahara was not just a military loss. It was a spiritual crisis that would force him to reevaluate his entire approach to life. During their escape, Takezo and Matahachi took shelter with a widow named Oko and her daughter Akemi. The months they spent hiding in this remote village gave Takezo time to reflect on his experiences. He watched ordinary people living simple lives, finding happiness in small pleasures and daily routines. For the first time, he wondered if there might be more to existence than endless conflict. But Takezo's restless spirit could not be contained for long. When he learned that he was wanted by the authorities as a fugitive, he decided to return home and face whatever consequences awaited him. This decision marked the beginning of his transformation from Shinmin Takezo, the wild young warrior, into Miyamoto Musashi, the master swordsman and philosopher. Upon his return to his home village, Takezo was captured and imprisoned by the local Buddhist monk, Takuan Soho. Rather than executing the young man, Takuan saw potential in him that others had missed. The wise monk decided to help Takezo understand the true nature of strength and the warrior's path. "Your sword technique is impressive," Takuan told his prisoner, "but your spirit is chaotic and unfocused. A true warrior must cultivate both his martial skills and his inner wisdom. Without wisdom, strength becomes mere brutality." For 3 years, Takezo remained Takuan's prisoner, but these were not years of punishment. They were years of education and self-discovery. The monk introduced him to classical literature, poetry, painting, and philosophy. Slowly, the angry young man began to understand that true mastery required more than just physical prowess. During his confinement, Takezo read voraciously, studying military strategy, Zen philosophy, and the great works of Chinese and Japanese literature. He learned calligraphy, painted landscapes, and composed poetry. Most importantly, he began to understand the deeper principles that governed not just combat, but all aspects of life. When Takuan finally released him, the man who emerged was no longer Shinmin Takezo. He had taken a new name, Miyamoto Musashi, symbolizing his rebirth as a true warrior philosopher. The name Musashi meant warrior or martial, but it also contained deeper meanings related to the cultivation of inner strength and wisdom. Musashi's first test as a reborn warrior came when he challenged the Yoshioka School, one of the most prestigious sword schools in Kyoto. The Yoshioka family had served the Ashikaga shoguns for generations and considered themselves the finest swordsmen in Japan. They were outraged when an unknown ronin challenged their authority. The first duel was against Yoshioka Seijuro, the head of the school. Musashi arrived late to the appointed meeting place, a psychological tactic designed to unsettle his opponent. When Seijuro attacked with his famous family technique, Musashi countered with a simple but perfectly timed strike that shattered his opponent's wooden sword and broke his arm. The defeat of their leader enraged the Yoshioka family, who demanded a second match. This time, Musashi faced Seijuro's younger brother, Denshichiro. Again, Musashi employed unconventional tactics, this time wielding a wooden staff instead of a sword. The match ended quickly when Musashi's staff struck Denshichiro in the head, killing him instantly. The third and final confrontation with the Yoshioka school was not a formal duel, but an ambush. Dozens of Yoshioka students and hired assassins waited for Musashi in a bamboo grove, intending to kill him and restore their school's honor. But Musashi had anticipated this treachery and arrived early, hidden in the darkness. When the ambush was sprung, Musashi moved through his enemies like a ghost, his two swords cutting down opponents with surgical precision. By the time the sun rose, the Yoshioka school's reputation was destroyed, and Musashi had established himself as Japan's most formidable swordsman. These victories brought Musashi fame, but they also brought him a deeper understanding of the warrior's path. Each battle taught him something new about strategy, timing, and the psychology of combat. He began to develop his own school of swordsmanship, which he called Niten Ichiru, or Two Heavens as One School. The foundation of Musashi's fighting style was the simultaneous use of both a long sword, katana, and a short sword, wakizashi. While most swordsmen focused on mastering a single weapon, Musashi realized that using both hands independently gave him significant advantages in combat. This technique required years of training to perfect, as it demanded complete ambidexterity and the ability to think with both sides of the brain simultaneously. But Musashi's innovations went beyond mere technique. He understood that victory in combat depended as much on psychological factors as physical skills. He studied his opponents carefully, looking for weaknesses in their character as well as their swordsmanship. He would arrive late to duels to create anxiety, or choose unusual weapons to confuse his enemies. As his reputation grew, challenges came from all across Japan. Samurai, ronin, and masters of various martial arts sought to test themselves against the legendary Miyamoto Musashi. Each encounter taught him something new, not just about fighting, but about human nature itself. One of his most memorable encounters was with a young man named Sasaki Kojiro, who wielded a sword longer than any other in Japan. Kojiro was known as the Swallow Cut for his ability to strike down birds in flight with his impossibly long blade. He was young, proud, and convinced that his unique weapon made him invincible. The duel was arranged to take place on Ganryu Island, a small piece of land in the strait between Honshu and Kyushu. As was his custom, Musashi arrived late, keeping his opponent waiting under the hot sun. But this delay served a deeper purpose than mere psychological warfare. During his journey to the island, Musashi had carved a wooden sword from an oar, making it even longer than Kojiro's famous blade. When he finally arrived, the sight of this crude but oversized weapon both confused and angered his opponent. "You mock me by bringing a piece of wood to a sword fight," Kojiro declared, his voice trembling with rage. "The weapon is nothing," Musashi replied calmly. "The man is everything." The duel began at noon, with both warriors circling each other on the sandy beach. Kojiro's technique was indeed magnificent. His long sword moved like a silver serpent, creating defensive patterns that seemed impossible to penetrate. But Musashi had studied his opponent's style and identified a crucial weakness. Kojiro's sword was so long that it gave him tremendous reach, but it also required more time to recover from each strike. Musashi waited patiently, allowing his opponent to attack first, then stepped inside Kojiro's guard at precisely the right moment. His wooden sword struck Kojiro's head just as the young man's blade cut through the edge of Musashi's kimono. Kojiro fell to the sand, his skull crushed by the impact of Musashi's improvised weapon. As he died, he whispered, "I understand now. It was never about the sword." Standing over his fallen opponent, Musashi felt the same emptiness he had experienced after his first kill as a teenager. Victory had come at the cost of a young man's life, and he wondered if there might be a way to prove one's mastery without destroying others. This duel marked a turning point in Musashi's career. At the age of 30, he had defeated every significant challenger in Japan and established himself as the country's greatest swordsman. But rather than continuing to seek new opponents, he began to withdraw from the world of competitive dueling. Musashi spent the next decade wandering throughout Japan, no longer as a warrior seeking challenges, but as a student seeking wisdom. He studied with Zen masters, learned from artists and craftsmen, and observed the natural world with the eyes of a philosopher rather than a fighter. During this period, he developed many of his most profound insights into the nature of strategy and conflict. He realized that the principles that governed combat could be applied to all aspects of life: business negotiations, political maneuvering, artistic creation, and personal relationships. "The way of strategy is the way of nature," he wrote in his journal. "Water always finds the path of least resistance, yet it can carve through the hardest stone. The warrior must learn to be like water, flexible, persistent, and ultimately irresistible." Musashi also began to understand that true strength came not from the ability to defeat others, but from the ability to defeat oneself. The greatest enemy any warrior faced was his own ego, his own fears and desires. Mastering these internal opponents was far more difficult than mastering any external technique. As he approached middle age, Musashi began to accept students and share his knowledge with a new generation of warriors. But his teaching methods were unconventional, focusing as much on mental discipline and spiritual development as on sword techniques. "Do not think of winning or losing," he would tell his students. "Think only of doing what must be done. The outcome will take care of itself." His students found this approach difficult to understand at first. They had come to learn from Japan's greatest swordsmen, expecting intensive training in combat techniques. Instead, they found themselves studying poetry, practicing meditation, and learning to paint with brushes instead of fighting with swords. But those who persevered discovered that Musashi's methods produced remarkable results. Students who learned to quiet their minds and focus their spirits found that their sword techniques improved dramatically. They began to move with the same fluid grace that characterized their master's fighting style. One of Musashi's most devoted students was a young samurai named Iori, whom he had adopted as his son. Iori possessed natural talent with weapons, but more importantly, he had the patience and humility necessary to absorb his master's deeper teachings. Remember, Musashi told Iori during one of their training sessions, "The sword is just a tool. The real weapon is your mind, your spirit, your understanding of the way things truly are. Master these, and you will never need to draw your sword." As Musashi entered his 50s, he began to turn his attention increasingly toward artistic and intellectual pursuits. He painted landscapes and portraits with the same precision he had once applied to swordsmanship. His calligraphy became renowned throughout Japan for its bold, confident strokes. But his greatest artistic achievement was his writing. Musashi began work on a comprehensive guide to strategy and philosophy that would eventually become the Book of Five Rings, one of the most influential texts on martial arts and military strategy ever written. The book was structured around 5 elemental principles: earth, water, fire, wind, and void, each representing a different aspect of strategic thinking. Through this framework, Musashi attempted to distill everything he had learned during his decades as a warrior and philosopher. Musashi reflected on the long journey that had brought him from angry young fighter to respected master. In 1645, at the age of 61, Miyamoto Musashi completed the Book of Five Rings just weeks before his death. He had achieved something that few warriors in history could claim. He had never lost a duel, never been defeated in battle, and never stopped learning and growing as a human being. His final words, spoken to Iori as he lay dying in his simple cave retreat, summed up his life's philosophy. "I have spent my entire life learning to die with honor. Now I understand that the real challenge was learning to live with honor." Miyamoto Musashi died peacefully, surrounded by his students and adopted son, having transformed himself from a violent young man into one of Japan's greatest philosophers and artists. His legacy would influence not just martial arts, but strategic thinking in fields as diverse as business, politics, and personal development. The way of the sword had led him to the way of wisdom, proving that true mastery in any field requires not just technical skill, but a deep understanding of life itself. In death as in life, Miyamoto Musashi remained undefeated, having conquered the greatest opponent of all, his own limitations. you